Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Yes. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that part is I'm socially media challenged still a little bit when it comes to the video and that aspect. I still am not quite clicked into where I need to be. And oh my God, you're like the one person who has a bigger water jug than I do, and I'm very impressed. Hmm. Yep. Yes, I understand. Okay. Right. Oh God. Right. Okay.
All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to I think this is episode number 5 of Mental Health Chat. I am your host, Matt, aka Mental Health Matt, and I'm joined today by our latest guest, the latest in our hopefully what will be a very long line of guests, Mike Cation. So welcome, Mike. Glad to have you with us. Yeah, it's very good to have you with us. So Mike is it comes from a very different background to a lot of the guests we've had so far. We've had people from the poker background. We've had people from the psychiatry background, Dr. Rob Tarswell. Mike is a tennis broadcaster. Someone says in chat that they cannot hear you. 1 second. Let me just make sure that it's not on your end. It's definitively on my end, I think. Let me make sure that that's coming through okay.
One,
All right.
two, three, four,
Yes.
five. You
Okay.
can. Okay.
Yeah, I had to mess with one of the audio inputs. I think it's coming through now. Thank you, Cricket Pinkball in the chat. That's my wife. She's looking out for me, making sure that you can be heard. All right, thank you.
Perfect.
So yes, welcome, Mike. Good to have you with us. Let's do that again.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I mean, it's a beautiful day out in Tulsa, Oklahoma. What more do you want, really? Other than to
Absolutely,
not be
sounds
in
good.
Tulsa, Oklahoma, I suppose. That's a different story.
Well, yeah, glad to have you with us. So Mike is a tennis broadcaster, podcaster, father, mental health advocate, all kinds of things. And I think this is going to be a great opportunity for us to talk about some stuff that maybe people might not be too familiar with, because I think people are accustomed to people are accustomed to watching pro sports, and the broadcasters and the commentators are just there, right? They're just in the
Right.
background, and they're just always there, and you kind of don't know what their story is individually necessarily. I used to want to be a soccer commentator growing up
Mm.
in the UK, but I had no idea how to get there, right? So let's start by talking a little bit about your story and how you got into that, because I feel like people would find this pretty interesting. So tell us a little
Yeah.
bit how you got into it.
I was one of those kids, Matt, when I was 5, 6 years old, instead of in the morning, before school, instead of watching cartoons or Bozo the Clown or whatever it might be, I was the kid watching ESPN Sports Center.
Right.
I mean, that's just what I was doing at
Hmm.
6:30 in the morning, and it would be on that infinite loop of repeats all morning long at that time on ESPN. And that's just what I wanted to do. I played sports, specifically baseball, and then later on tennis, and I just continued down that path. We didn't have a radio or broadcasting program in high school, but as soon as I got into college at the University of Illinois, I was immediately in the communications department. I got a public access show doing ska music. I was right when, like my Boss Tones and Real Big Fish and all that happened. I was the ska DJ on a community access station. But then I was news and broadcast, or news and sports guy for, ended up being 6 radio stations in Champaign, Illinois. I was involved with tennis, having played, and then became the public address announcer for the Illinois men's tennis program, the university tennis program. Also started doing some PA work for basketball there at Illinois, and baseball, some of the other sports. But I stayed very involved with tennis because it was the sport I loved the most. And then after about 13 years of radio, and just, again, it's top 40 radio most of the time, where I was just part of one of those wacky morning zoos. And somebody happened to be passing by the University of Illinois in Champaign, Illinois, hosted the NCAA, the Collegiate Tennis Championship. And somebody came to me and said, listen, I know you're a broadcaster. There's this job that's popped open, basically doing, it's kind of like, the easy way to put it is kind of like minor league tennis, if you will, players who are ranked a little bit above 100 in the world.
Sure.
They said, there's this broadcast job that's opened up. Would you be at all interested? And then about a month later, I was in Winnetka, Illinois, on the north side of Chicago, broadcasting what's called a challenger tennis tournament of guys. The first match I did was players who are 600 and 700 in the world. No clue who they were, and I was just kind of fighting my way through it. But that was back in 2013, and I've just kind of continued to progress through the tennis rankings, much like players do, and have had incredible opportunities over the last couple of years to be at Grand Slams, and it's been a lot of fun. But this is what I wanted to do. If you'd have asked me when I was 15 years old what I wanted to do with my life, I would clearly have said tennis broadcaster. It's very specific, but I managed to achieve this, and I'm proud of myself in that regard, and I also take it. I have a lot of pride in being able to tell the stories of specifically players who are, not Roger Federer, who are not Serena Williams. Those are, everybody knows their story in the tennis world, right? But if I can tell a story of somebody who's maybe 150 in the world and what they've been through over the last couple of years, that's something I take great pride in, and I'm honored to do that. And I've made some great relationships with players along the way as a result of that.
Awesome. That sounds great. It's always nice and gratifying to hear a story of somebody who starts out with something they want to do when they're a kid and actually gets there, right? I think we're all so accustomed now to this world where people take different career paths and they jump around here and there and go backwards and forwards between different things. But it sounds like you're in a place where you've really found that thing that you want to stick with,
Yeah, and it's been very hard, obviously, over the last couple of months. My mental health has certainly been challenged. I think here in the States, Matt, and I know it's a little bit different for places in a lot of places in Europe and things. We identify so much with our work, right? And identify so much with our jobs, and not having that part of my identity has been very challenging in that regard. But I got to go to the U.S. Open and broadcast in very unique circumstances there in New York. In September, but it felt so good, like I was kind of whole again for a couple of weeks, to just have that to go back to, and just kind of realize again, I am good at something. I can really do this relatively well. So that was a lot of fun, and there are going to be some opportunities coming up in November as well to broadcast. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I love it. I really love what I do, and I think that's something that I'm trying to impress as well upon my 6-year-old daughter too.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about the parenting side of mental health. I'm sure probably a little bit later on. We had a comment from the chat from someone called Prodigy ENG who says, "Mike, what a legend." I don't know if that's somebody that you know, but
Joe, that's my friend Joe. Yeah, he's over. Yeah, we've hung out a couple of times at Grand Slams. He is a huge tennis fan. Pops into my poker stream every once in a while
nice.
when I get into that. But yeah, Joe's it's really unique, Matt. And I don't know if you've experienced this through not only this stream but also your poker career. Like, it's poker's kind of a niche, like much like tennis is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like one of those. It's not baseball. It's not football /
Right.
soccer. We have a very core, dedicated group of fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And poker Twitter is one thing, tennis Twitter is another one. And I've made so many friends, Joe being one of them, over the years, of these people who are so passionate about the sport of tennis, much more so than I've ever been passionate about anything in my life. I know you've popped in on the Doug Polk and Daniel Negreanu arguments over the last couple of days on poker.
Mm-hmm.
How passionate poker Twitter has been about that.
Yeah.
We get that on tennis all the time.
I'm sure you do. Yeah.
These people, like, you'll have these. Joe's one of them who might have a favorite player who's ranked 250 in the world that you've never heard of, and I might have kind of casually heard of, right? But like, that's the thing, is the passion of the tennis community is really both. It's fun. It's also rather crazy and a little bit kind of nutty, but I really love it. And Joe's just one of these unique people. Luckily, I've been able to meet him over the last couple of years.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you ever feel like, in an environment where everybody's very intense like that, do you ever feel like you just kind of need to disconnect from it for a bit?
It's interesting. My podcast partner, who's a player, actually is doing that right now because he felt he was so engaged in it. With the fact that I broadcast what are called, again, challenger tournaments, we're not on ESPN, for example, here in the States, or BBC, whatever it might be, whatever, Australia has their own as well. We have to make sure we engage on social media. We have to engage with the fans to make sure they know, hey, this stream is available for you. Here's where it's at. So I don't really have that luxury to always do that, but I do make sure that when I'm home, and specifically with my daughter, I try to stay away as much as possible so that I'm focused on my daughter in those moments.
Sure.
When I don't have her, I'm a divorced parent, but when I don't have her, then I'm re-engaged. But those times with my daughter, those are the ones where I am able to kind of step away just a little bit and check up on it at the end of the day, as opposed to throughout the entire day.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that seems like a good system for anyone, really. I suppose when you're in a career where it sort of requires your full focus and it requires your full attention, having that balance where you can disconnect is obviously super important.
Right.
So on that note, I'm kind of curious what your day-to-day looks like as a broadcaster, because I think people look at, or at least for myself, it's like you look at professional sports and you recognize that the sports themselves don't happen every day. There's not necessarily, for example, a tennis tournament going on all the time that you can be commentating on. So what does your day-to-day look like, and how do you sort of manage that process, maybe as far as balancing the family aspects of life, the need to focus at certain times versus disconnect at other times?
I've said to people before that I have basically two lives, one at home and one on the road.
Right.
And so I work somewhere between 16 and 20 weeks a year where I am somewhere else, away from my house entirely. And those days are rather structured, built around, however many matches I have, whether it be at a Grand Slam, I might do 1 or 2 matches in a day. Whereas if I'm at a challenger tournament, I might have as many as 8 matches that I'm broadcasting in one day.
Wow. Okay.
Consecutively. So everything in those days when I'm somewhere else, it's all structured. It's all built around tennis. If I have some time to go and explore part of the city, it's fine. When I'm at home, though, everything is typically built around the time that I do have with my daughter. And so it's kind of just around her schedule, especially right now we're doing virtual learning. But yeah, I try to build as much as I can around her. And then when I don't have her, I will be watching tennis on watching a challenger stream from somewhere in the world and playing poker. I mean, that's kind of my life, and trying to work out as well. But those days at a tennis tournament, to kind of get back to your question, those days are really interesting. I can walk you through what I was doing at the U.S. Open.
Sure.
I was put into, I was doing the feature matches, the night matches every night. So I was working from 7 o'clock on until maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. So basically what I would do is I would use 2 or 3 hours before the matches to prep, get all my work done ahead of time, make sure I know everything about the players, stylistically, story-wise, in terms of, kind of the behind the scenes stuff about, greatest of all time type notes, and, how they play certain matches, whether Novak, hit somebody in the neck with a ball the other day or whatever it might be. I did that for Joe because he's a huge Novak fan. But we have to know all those storylines because we want to make sure we're as informed, if not more so, than the fans. And so it's 2 or 3 hours of doing prep, and just making sure, like you're hydrated as much as possible so the voice stays fresh, and just kind of building your schedule so that you have that 4 to 5 hours that you're completely locked in, able to stay focused with the fans and the players and the play as much as possible, and then grab something to eat afterwards. A long 4 or 5 hours, pretty hungry. You're moving a lot. I mean, you want to make sure you're projecting the excitement, so you move a lot as well, and then go to sleep and do it all over again the next day.
Sure. Yeah, I think that it's always interesting to talk to people who have careers in that kind of area where you're very on for a certain period, like you're at a tournament, you're very focused and you're doing your thing, and then you're also very, you're off. You're sort of you're forced to be out of the moment. You're not like in that zone of just being focused on what you're doing. So it's an interesting contrast there, and I think probably a lot of people can kind of relate to that. We did have a question come forward, which I think is a really interesting one. It's a little bit off the topic of tennis specifically, but I think probably both of us can tackle or can have an attempt at answering this one because it's an interesting question. So Monobrow147 is the username, says, "Hi guys, not sure what the format for this is, but I was very successful until around 2 years ago when it all went wrong. I assume you're both successful." Well, I mean, I don't know how successful either of us would consider ourselves to be, but we're here and we're answering questions, so let's give it a try. Have you ever failed at anything significant, and do you have any strategies for dealing with that and trying to start again? That's a really interesting one. Do you have any immediate thoughts there, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, the immediate thought is failure is okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, that's the thing is, the more you're able to try and put yourself out there, and we obviously don't know Monobrow's exact circumstances, but I think the thing is you just keep putting yourself out there, keep giving yourself those opportunities. In terms of, I've been fired from jobs. I mean, that's part of, especially in broadcasting. I mean, that's what you do. You don't get invited back to certain things, right? I've been fired, I've been let go, and then you work your connections and you try to find another opportunity, and you just keep doing it if you believe in yourself and trust in yourself. And we all have with that from time to time, obviously, but that's the thing is you put that belief in yourself and put that trust in yourself that you're going to be able to learn your failure. And that's how I would say it, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that my own sort of approach to that is to look at it from a language perspective and think of it in terms of failure, or how you define failure or success. It's really all a question of time, right? In that when you look at a certain project or a certain goal that you're trying to achieve, the idea is you're measuring it within a certain time frame, and you're saying, did I achieve it up to this point or not? And if you don't achieve it within that time frame, you say you failed. But then there's a lot of instances that you could look at where if you extend that time frame and you say, okay, well, you fail at one thing and then you try something else. Well, now when you look at a longer time frame, you're actually succeeding because that failure was just one midpoint on that longer timeline. So the way I tend to look at it is that the only true failure is to give up before you reach the end of the timeline, right? The only true failure is to stop trying somewhere along that middle point where you're on that way to success and you haven't got there yet. And when you look at the pathways that people take who are quote unquote successful, I certainly think that there's a lot of room for each person to define success in their own way. But when you look at people who are generically successful, it's an up and down pathway, right? It's a pathway full of failures and successes and struggles and things that get easier, things that get more difficult over time. And we look at them as they are, and we don't look at them as they were when they were midway through that journey. And so the way I suppose I would I would look at that, or the way I try to look at it in my own life, is to recognize that when you're focused on the process, when you're focused on what you're doing to try to be consistently improving, and you don't put a timeline and say I've failed, or I have like this project has stopped and now I'm starting anew. When you just look at it as a constant or a continuous evolution, you feel a lot better about yourself, because you don't feel like you've reached that point where it's like, everything that I was before this point is now useless, So for you yourself, Monobrow, listening to this, I would encourage you to look at whatever it was that happened until 2 years ago, and think of that as a part of a journey that you're on. And that journey, it may be into a new phase now. You may be doing something different to what you were doing before, but that pathway towards success, whatever you eventually end up achieving, you will achieve it as a product of the experiences you went through when you quote unquote failed 2 years ago, right? That failure can be something that can actually help you to achieve more than what you would have done before, because that failure is something you're going to learn from, and it's something that's going to allow you to come back stronger. So I think there's a number of different reframes that you could put into place there. But I think that for whatever field somebody's operating in, whether it's myself in poker, whether it's Mike in tennis, I think that we all go through these ups and downs, right? We all go through periods where we doubt ourselves, as you said, Mike. We all go through periods where our confidence gets a bit low. And the key thing for me is at those times, you have to have the strength to persevere and not give up on yourself and feel like your chances of success have disappeared, because they really haven't, right?
And to that point, I think it's really important to say, you failed at something maybe, or you can look at it as you failed at something. You yourself are not the failure.
Exactly.
Right. That's a very important point, and an important distinction to make within yourself, is that you can fail at one thing. That doesn't make you a failure. And I would also be remiss, Stan Wawrinka is a very famous tennis player who I think a lot of people have heard of, won a couple of Grand Slams, and he actually has on his arm along this point, it's a Samuel Beckett quote. It says, "Ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better." And
Mm-hmm.
it's one that he uses himself to say, listen, I have failed. I have lost a lot of times, and made horrible plays, horrible decisions within my tennis career, but I'm going to learn from that, take it into my next opportunity, whatever that may be, and then move forward and fail better, as he says. It's going to be a constant learning process as we go, as you mentioned, over time, to get to that point where we would, quote unquote, deem ourselves a success.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And to continue the sort of the tennis analogy, so to speak, when you look at the best tennis players out there, it's not like they never lose a game, right? It's not like they never lose a match, or they never have a bad year. I mean, I don't know, maybe Roger Federer doesn't have bad years, but I'm sure that if you can look at each of these careers of great players in any sport, you can chart that even if their average level is higher than everybody else, there's still ups and downs within that pathway, right? So
right, exactly.
That's an important reframe, I think. So hopefully that was helpful, Monobrow. Thank you for the question. Really, really great question. So to get back to your own journey, Mike, I think that what we haven't touched on yet is your own sort of mental health journey and your ups and downs that you've been through. Because obviously one of the main things that we like to do on this show is to encourage people to be open about what they go through. And you've been very forthcoming, I think, about the fact that mental health has been, something that you've had your own experiences with. So tell us a little bit about how your journey has been, and kind of how, maybe particularly how the last sort of 6 to 12 months or so with the COVID crisis have affected it.
Yeah, I've battled depression throughout my entire life. I started going to therapy when I was 13 or 14 years of age. Really struggled with self-confidence. I have parents who I love and love me and trust implicitly, but they were young parents. They got divorced when I was 3 years old. Mm-hmm. And there are complications that obviously come along with that, even with the greatest people in the world. And I love my parents very much, but there are complications that come along with that, right?
Sure.
So it's been something that's been a continuous evolution for me, that I've kind of gone through certain difficult periods. Specifically for me, one of my bigger issues is codependency with other people. So as a result, my bigger issues when I've had incredibly difficult depressive episodes have both revolved around the end of long-term relationships. One that was a dating relationship for 7 years, then the end of my marriage was incredibly challenging, to say the least. I actually spent 3 or 4 days in a mental health institution after the end of my marriage, just because I struggled so much with the grief of it, the loss of it. I have particular issues when it comes to approval, which is a very interesting thing about broadcasting, because we are constantly getting approval or disapproval from the audience. But yeah, so that's, I'm on medication. I still continue to see a therapist today. But it's one of those things, Matt, and I've listened to so many of your talks over the last couple of weeks, especially your daily check-ins. You know, it never kind of goes away. It's always there in some varying degree, not only on the day, but on the year, longer periods of time. And we all just try to manage it as best we can, learn from the experiences of what helps us, what doesn't help us. And I think I'm in a decent place right now. COVID has been incredibly testing for me. I mentioned earlier the idea of, the identity, your self-identity coming along with your job. I'm lucky that I have a job that I really am proud to identify with because I love it so much. But tennis didn't happen for about 6 months, about 5 months, really. I lost out on a lot of jobs that I already had lined up through the year. On top of it, the work itself was taken away. A lot of the friendships that I have friendships with players, I have friendships with officials, other broadcasters. Those opportunities are taken away. So your friendships are frayed in that regard. So the last 6 months specifically, I really went through a difficult period where I started drinking too much. To be honest, as a coping mechanism. Proud of I never was with my daughter, but when I was on my own, I would drink too much, and kind of going through that depressive state. And I've kind of worked my way through it and just gotten past it. But I think
it's good to hear.
It's been very difficult to just kind of figure out that identity portion, when so much of it is not only, as I mentioned, the work itself, but so many of your friendships are built into that. To not have that source of identity for 5 or 6 months has been very difficult. I think, though, over the last month or so specifically, especially once I got the U.S. Open, not only the work, but also the money, because finances are tied in there as well.
Sure, right, for everybody.
But yeah, it's definitely been a lot better over the last month and a half, 2 months, just as that realization of, we're going to get to another side at some point, whenever that might happen. We're going to get to another side. You want to make sure you're prepared for that appropriately. And most importantly for me, Matt, is just this idea. I want to be a good representation to my daughter in every way that I can. And I, even though she's not here for some days, I want to make sure I'm presenting myself as a good parent, a good role model for her, even on those other days too, right? So
right.
I've done, I think, some hard work with meditation, with a new therapist that I've just started working with, to make sure that I'm healthy, so I can be happy with myself. And I think that rubs off more so than anything I can say to my daughter. Is if I'm happy within myself, that will be the best parenting I can possibly do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As someone who grew up with two parents who very obviously weren't happy, and who similarly, my parents divorced when I was 6. I can certainly speak to that. I think anybody who's a parent out there wants to do the best for their kid, but if the parent themselves is held down by depression, by mental health issues of whatever kind, it just makes everything harder for everybody, right? And I'm sure that there's probably a lot of parents out there who can appreciate that you're putting a lot of effort into making sure that you're in the best condition that you can be to give your daughter what she needs. So obviously kudos to you for that. So we have a couple comments Alakim, my friend Anderson says, "Wow, this new webcam setup looks amazing." Yeah, I like it. Right?
It does.
I got
Really
my Han
looks
Solo
amazing.
back there. I've got my bookcases. Like I got it all set up. This is great. Yeah, so this is nice. I like this. Thank you, Anderson. And Monobrow says, "Thanks, Mike and Matt. That's useful, particularly about trying to see it as a longer journey. Appreciate your response." Cool. Yeah. No problem. And the rest of you guys, if you have questions, feel free to fire them off in the chat. We're not going to do the whole questions at the end thing because everybody forgets what the questions are and it becomes a mess. So we'll just do questions as and when we get to them. So one thing you touched on there, Mike, I think was really interesting. You mentioned that when you went through a rough period, you spent 3 or 4 days in a mental health institution. Could you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like? Because I feel like a lot of people just have no idea what that feels like or looks like.
Yeah, I didn't either. So I was essentially suicidal. I have a great set of friends. It was actually their wedding weekend, and I was going to be the best man in their wedding, and they said, you can't do this right now. You need help. You need to get some concentrated help right now. And they helped get me to that point where I was, going into this institution, the Pavilion in Champaign, Illinois. What it's like, I think I can't speak for all of them, right? But what it was for me was I needed sleep in those moments.
Right.
Those moments, there was, so many people who go through depressive episodes, they just can't sleep, right? You just constantly awake. It makes things just worse and worse and worse. So that was the first thing, was they helped medicate me to a point where I could sleep and get enough sleep to start that healing process.
Right.
And each person's healing process is so incredibly different. I think one of the things that it taught to me, let me restart here. They take away your phones, so there's not that constant need of looking at a phone at that point. You are in there to work on yourself. They take away a lot of the no shoelaces on your shoes. I mean, it's right. It's sobering. It's a sobering moment where you realize you're in there for a pretty stark, grave reason. You have a room. They are bringing their meals are brought to you. Those type of things. You have a visitation period with your family or friends can come visit at those moments. You have individual sessions with a counselor or a therapist. You also have group sessions. And so it is intensive. If anybody's gone through a mental health process, be it with a therapist or a psychiatrist, whatever, it's like that, except ramped up to the nth degree, where it's constantly about that learning process about yourself, how to make yourself healthy. You are given some free time to sketch or read books, things like that. There is one TV in the room, but you are there to focus on yourself and getting healthy, whatever that process is. I think what it brought for me was this idea, as I learned from people who are in there for, much more difficult, challenging reasons. There were people who were dealing with sexual assault as a child and are still dealing with that 25, 30 years later. Long-term drug abuse, those really systemic and deep long-term problems that a lot of people have dealt with in our society. And it kind of just gave me that realization that it takes nothing away from my pain, my anguish, my suicidal feelings, but also I am blessed to have a lot of positive things. No matter how difficult my childhood might have been or was not, I did have a lot of things given to me as a child that a lot of these other people did not have, or bad things that happened to them in their childhood that never, was even a thought process for me. So it gave me that realization that I'm going to be able to get through this. This is a very difficult time in my life. Let's try to get to the other side. And once I had that moment of realization and just kind of getting some of that sleep, and, it's okay to focus on yourself and get yourself healthy, make yourself better. I think that kind of was just a turning point, just kind of like if I think about it as a V recovery, right? Just this idea that it was really dark really quickly, but then I was able to just kind of slowly start from there and move forward and just kind of get a good base to start with. They set me up with a therapist. I was able to get on medication and just kind of start the healing process. But it's hard because, you have 24 hours of the day, you are reflective. You don't have that ability to kind of lose yourself in your phone or lose yourself in television. You've got books, and that's great, but you're there to focus on yourself. And it was a rewarding experience as I look back on it now, but at the time, very grave and as I said, stark. I mean, it was hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that. Do you kind of feel like that was a turning point for you, I guess?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I also mentioned earlier that I went through. I'm codependent is one of the issues I have, and for
Mm-hmm.
people who aren't necessarily familiar with it, for me, what it means is that I base my self-esteem, my self-worth, and happiness on somebody else's self-worth or happiness,
Right.
whether I'm able to help make them happy. And that was one that I realized with especially starting in that institution, just realizing that that's a big issue for me. And then they set me up with Codependence Anonymous, which is a very similar to Alcoholics Anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
a 12-step program to kind of again help start that path, towards a healthier me.
Sure.
So yeah, it really. I like to think of it as just kind of a base moment. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that was the part where somebody helped me. I needed help in that moment to just kind of get picked up a little bit. Somebody picked me up off the ground, and then I have to, chart my own and create my own journey here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just having that help, both from the institution and also my friends, to just kind of allow me to start taking off on my own path, my own journey. That was what I needed in that moment. And I feel so thankful that I had that in that moment. A lot of people don't, and
Mm-hmm.
I had that great friend who said, this is where you need to be. I had good people inside that institution who were saying, okay, your problem is a little bit different than some of the other people, but here's what we think might help you.
Mm-hmm.
And we build from there, and it's never stops, but it's definitely a better journey for me now, having done it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to hear it, and it speaks to the importance, I think, overall of a support network. For anybody who,
Yes. Correct.
anybody who goes through mental health ups and downs, we suffer so much more if we don't have that support network in place. And I think that one of the just to speak to why I'm doing this channel as a whole, one of the things I think would make the biggest difference for us as a society is if our friendship groups were serving more effectively as support networks, as opposed to simply, a group of people that we see more regularly than anybody else, And
Yes.
I think that it's very gratifying to hear that you were in a position where you had friends who were able to say, look, this is what you need right now, or this is what you're going through, even if you may not see it yourself. And they were able to take care of you in that way. So I think that, I would love for other friendship groups to be able to use that as an example, to recognize that people need to look out for each other. And if we do that collectively, if every friendship group was as supportive as that, and everybody was as open as that to be able to get the help that they needed, then obviously, we'd be in a better place there. So that's great to hear.
If I can,
Go
to
ahead.
just build
ahead.
on that, Matt, it's one of the reasons why I reached out to you.
Mm-hmm.
When you said, you don't know me. I followed you because I'm a poker guy myself, and I have great admiration for your style of play and the way you
Thank you.
speak about poker. And
Thank
so when you started talking about you wanted to do this, I reached out immediately, because I think you're exactly right. The more only up for yourself, so you can talk to your friends about empathy, about emotion, about your own feelings, and actual real talk about those
Mm-hmm.
those things, right? That's a much better situation, because then they're able to kind of read you a little bit better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of see when you actually need that help and what that help might be for you, whether it's going over and just eating a tub of ice cream with your best friend when you know that they're having that moment, right? Or whatever it might be. But the more we make it a norm to talk about our emotions, talk about our feelings amongst each other, I think you're exactly right. And it's why I have such incredible admiration for what you're doing. I think it's incredible, and I think it's important, especially coming from your background within poker, and how there is enough toxic masculinity within that. that realm. I can speak to it from athletics as well. That it is the norm not to really talk about empathy, emotion. The more we make it a norm to talk about those things, the better.
Yeah, completely agree, and I appreciate all the positive words. I promise, guys, I'm not paying Mike to say this. All right, so let's tackle Smithy's question. Smithy885 in the chat says, having suffered with lifelong self-esteem issues, I place way too much value on my success in activities, hobbies, job, particularly learning poker. So when I get it wrong or don't progress as quickly as I want, I take it incredibly personally, feel like a failure, and beat myself up about it. I feel you there, man. I feel you there.
Yeah.
Are there any ways of separating personal feelings of self-esteem from activities and hobbies? Any thoughts on that, Mike?
It's such a tough question. Yeah, I was just reading that as well, Matt, and that's a really challenging one, to really kind of separate those two things. It's funny. I can say for me, when I was going through that depressive episode and coming out of the mental health institution, one of the things that actually helped me was poker. Just because it was, for me at the time, I was able to disassociate emotion from it. It was just like, I come from a more of a math background,
right? Yeah.
So as a result, it's numbers for me, right? And so that was easy for me. That being said, we put so much worth and into those activities, especially poker. And I think you said it very well when you were talking about just that long-term journey, how we focus on it in a time perspective. It's a much more adequate way of looking at it, maybe setting that goal and just realizing you will have missteps, you will have failures along the way, but it's okay to take it, learn from it, and continue to progress and move forward. And also just to kind of decrease the amount of emphasis you put on it. If you feel like you're putting too much into it in terms of that emotional component, take a step back. I'm a big believer in the meditative process and just kind of separating a little bit and just kind of having that moment of clarity. And so I know that's something that's worked for me. But I think that's the thing, is if you're able to look at it as a long-term process, long-term journey, that will help you and find whatever coping mechanism that might work for you to kind of learn to disassociate short-term results from your own self-esteem.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think from my own perspective, I think that something that I would encourage people to think about is if you're in a particular pattern where you have a tendency to beat yourself up consistently about things, then recognize that pattern is probably something that you learned at some point in your life, right? That was probably something that you started doing as a response to the way your environment was reacting towards you. And so you started telling yourself, I need to be better, as a way to try to protect yourself from something, perhaps. So first of all, I would say recognize that if you do have that tendency, it's not your fault that you're doing that. And so, don't beat yourself up and then beat yourself up about the fact that you're beating yourself up, because I've done that. And I've been in that position before. I've been like, man, I feel like shit about something that happened, and then I feel like shit because I feel like shit about it, and then and it's like a recursive thing where
it's a shame spiral.
Yeah, it's a shame spiral. That's what it is. You go down this rabbit hole of you feel bad, and then you feel worse because you feel bad, and you feel worse because of that and that. Yeah, it's terrible. So the way to break that cycle is to recognize that the fact that you feel bad is not your fault, and so you can kind of, as soon as you say I feel bad about this, recognize that the fact that you're doing that, the fact that you're beating yourself up is a learned behavior. And as a consequence, that also means you can train yourself out of it. You can train yourself to respond compassionately to yourself in these situations and say, it's okay for me not to be the best in the world at this right now. It's okay for me to make a mistake. And the key perspective change that is necessary for that is to recognize that even somebody that you believe is the best on the planet at whatever that thing is that you're trying to do, that person makes mistakes regularly, and forgiving themselves for those mistakes is a part of their process too. There is nobody on the planet who is so good at something that they can not only never make mistakes, but also if they did make a mistake, the solution for them is just beat themselves up until they stop making mistakes. that behavior, that sort of almost like abusive behavior towards oneself, is something that we pick up from somewhere. And I don't want to speculate as to where you picked it up from, but there are a number of places it could be. And in my own life, recognizing that I was being really hard on myself because other people in my life have been hard on me at times, that was a big turning point for me. So that's probably the way that I would tackle that one.
To add to that, Matt, I mean, in the tennis world, I think most people, no matter what you do, Novak Djokovic at the U.S. Open, if you probably saw highlights of it. He got frustrated, hit a ball, and it accidentally hit somebody in the throat. He was defaulted, kicked out of that tournament. Mm-hmm. You have ways of responding to that. You can go into that shame spiral and just kind of go into the tank and lose perspective. But I think, to his credit, he has been one of the most incredibly mentally tough people in the world, in his field specifically. He came back, he made the French Open final this past weekend. Mm-hmm. His next tournament out, he just was able to refocus and prioritize what was most crucial to him, and say, listen, I made a mistake. I'm going to learn from it. I can't just continuously beat myself up about it. I have to learn from it. And he did, and he moved forward. He had a great tournament in Paris this last week.
Great. Yeah. Certainly, I think he's probably one of there's probably a handful of tennis players that almost everybody's familiar with, right? And I'm sure he's one of them, exactly, for sure. So Prodigy ENG, I guess that's your friend Joe, asks, and I'm just going to read this for everybody else. Mike, for me, one of the best things to help me improve my mental health and social anxieties was landing a job which required me to talk to and interact with people on a daily basis. It can sometimes be a struggle, but the sense of achievement when I get through a tough situation in this setting is incredible. Do you feel your broadcasting career helped you in this sense? I guess just in that interaction sense. Interesting question.
It is, because I think it's funny. There are a lot of broadcasters who will say they struggle with personal communications, because of the fact you feel when you're communicating, you have to be on. This idea that you better bring it. If you're supposed to be the funny person, you better be funny. Whatever it is. And I think I have had to learn that it's okay not to be on all the time. I've had to learn, because otherwise, if I have a failure of having just a normal conversation with somebody, then I'll go into a shame spiral and just be beating myself up about, like, you didn't have to make just a stupid joke there. You could just have a conversation with them. I can say to Joe, having had conversations with him, if I'm speaking to him directly, the way you've communicated with me and just having normal interactions, I feel compassion for you. I can also say to you, I know your communications with me have been so fantastic that I don't think you would have a problem in those situations. That being said, I know we all go through our own self-confidence issues when it comes to that. And the more you can put yourselves into those situations where you have successes, and I know you will have successes, the better off you're going to be. And I know you had a recent mental health kind of moment last week. And I just know you specifically, Joe, and I know how hard you work on these things, and just be okay with yourself and know that you're going to have some bad moments and some good moments along this longer journey. And yeah, I know my broadcasting has helped me, and I know you having more and more of those experiences will help you as well.
Cool. That's great to hear. I'm sure Joe's happy to hear that. Yeah. So that actually raises an interesting question from my side as well, because I'm curious whether, just thinking about that sort of social anxiety that obviously a lot of people struggle with, do you ever feel a sense of anxiety about broadcasting when you're actually going on air? Do you feel like, oh, I have to be careful to say the right thing? Like, is that part of your job?
Sure. Of course. If I don't know about you before, like a big poker tournament, Matt, but if you don't get butterflies, if you don't like that little, then what are you doing? Right.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So when I know over the last couple of years, when I've had some of these new moments, I got to do my first Grand Slam semifinal this past year. I actually did 2 of them, and I was so nervous, because you want to make sure you get everything right. But I think one thing I have learned is that you're not going to get everything right. You in a poker tournament, you're not going to make every correct decision. It's just impossible.
Right.
The more you kind of get to the other side of that, of just this idea that not everything's going to be perfect. You're going to make some missteps. You're going to have a couple of failures. I'm going to say a couple of words incorrectly. It's going to happen. Just accept it and be accepting of yourself in that moment. But I absolutely have that anxiety. What's funny, Matt, is I can't speak in front of crowds.
Oh, interesting.
Absolutely horrendous. I MC a lot of events. As I mentioned, I've been a public address announcer, which is, if you're in an arena, a sporting arena, you're the guy who says, that's a 3-pointer by Billy Smith. That you're that guy that everybody hears. But when I'm fine when I'm broadcasting on television, I'm fine when I'm broadcasting on the radio and in a PA kind of a situation, because nobody is actually there looking at me.
Right.
Nobody is staring at me.
Yeah.
When I have 10 people in front of me and I'm having to give a talk to them, sweat pouring out, I'm just a mess in those moments. And I still have never gotten past that. That's when I'll MC a charity function. And I will have to take a shot beforehand of some sort of strong liquor, just to kind of like, oh, that's not, listen, I know that's not the right mental health move, but in that moment, I kind of need it just to chill out. But yeah, I absolutely have the anxiety. One thing I have learned though over the years is it's going to happen. You're going to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. If you need to apologize for it, you apologize and you move on. But yeah, I think I'm pretty good at this point of kind of letting those things go.
Have you ever had a moment on air where you made a mistake and the recognition of making a mistake like threw you into kind of a bit of a spiral like that?
First paid radio shift of all time. I've told this story. I don't know that I've ever actually talked about it in a broadcast ever.
All right, well, go ahead.
That sounds good. Radio shift was in a small town in Missouri, and it was 5:20 in the morning, and it was during the NBA basketball strike of 1999.
Okay.
And I was talking about the Chicago Bulls head coach, and I was a basketball fan from Chicago originally, and I said, yes, I mispronounced Vinny Del Negro.
Oh, yikes.
And this is the first ever paid radio shift.
Wow.
And I sat there completely frozen and I had more sports to read.
Yeah.
And I just immediately just hit the commercial next because oh my God, that was the worst.
Wow.
And then I had to go into obituaries right after that, which is again, a weird component of this particular job. But yeah, that actually having that in my first ever radio shift, it was just like,
it can't get any much worse than that. Yeah.
It's gonna happen, right?
Wow.
So that one has stuck with me ever since. I actually have one friend who refers to me as Vinny D. To always remind me of my mispronunciation of Vinny Del Negro. So,
how long? This is what, 1999? It's 20 years later, and he's still calling you. Wow. Okay.
Vinny D.
That's funny. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. I can relate in the sense, not necessarily in the broadcasting sense, but I can relate in that. I think when you're talking in some kind of context that is vaguely public, I've had this when doing public coaching or things like that. Yeah. You kind of get to a point where if you say the wrong thing and then you realize you said the wrong thing, part of you wants to go back and say it again, but there's also a part of you that wants to continue acting as if like you're retaining that professionalism of just moving on. And like I find that for me, like the anxiety starts to build up after a while, because you're thinking like, did they notice that? Did they not notice that? Do they care? Should I go back and correct myself? Should I try to like circle back in a way that repeats myself, but in a better way? And it like there's certainly a sense of anxiety there that I think when you're trying to communicate in a way where the words you use are very important, and the you want to get across a specific essence of what you're saying.
Yes.
It's a big challenge. So I think everybody probably has a ton of respect for somebody like yourself who can do it professionally and just push through that sense of like, I don't know if I'm going to say the right thing or not, but I'm just going to say it, and I hope that people like it.
It's so weird too, Matt, because going back to the kind of the mental health angle here of broadcasting specifically, there are a lot of people who I've talked to in broadcasting who have their own mental health battles that all kind of tend to go back towards the idea of approval. Whether it be some sort of challenge with their parenting or whatever it might be, but they are always constantly in need of approval. And I can certainly say that is a huge one for me. And probably one of the reasons why I'm in broadcasting is because that constant need of approval from an audience.
Right.
And it's this double-edged sword now in social media, because I was actually having this conversation with my therapist last night. I can do a great broadcast and I might get 100 tweets from people saying, "Hey, great job. It was a fun show. Thanks for doing it. Your podcast was fun." And then you're going to it's going to happen. You're going to have one or two people who tweet at you, send you an Instagram message. You just say, "What the fudge were you talking about? Like, what's wrong with you here? Like, you're terrible at this." I mean, I've gotten people who have just told, like, you should be fired. You should not have a job doing this. It's going to happen, right? And so it's this really difficult challenge of balancing this. I'm one of those people, Matt, who I might get 100 really nice things said to me, but I'm going to focus on that one over there that said I sucked today.
Yeah.
I'm going to focus on that one. That's just one of my weird mental health quirks, right?
Yeah.
And it's so hard because, you said it. Do we focus on that mistake that we did make that this person's referring to? Or do we just kind of blow past it and just remind yourself that it's okay to make that mistake and move on? It's such a mental health hurdle for people to get over, and the one that I struggle with on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I can relate on that front too, because this is something that affected my career as a poker player for a while too. Like not so much as a player, but in fact, as a player and a coach, because I had times where when I first started coaching, I think back in 2013, 2014, I was working for Tournament Poker Edge, started coaching. There was some random guy on 2+2 who just decided that I sucked at poker and I shouldn't be coaching. And, he was like starting threads about how I'm terrible. And, every time some thread came up where they were talking about like worst regs on PokerStars or like just all this random stuff. Like there's just one guy who insisted on telling me, or like even in some cases telling me very directly, like, you're terrible at this. You're robbing people blind by being a coach. Like, you should not be coaching, like all of this stuff. And it really got to me to the extent where I started to make decisions about like things like how much would I charge for coaching? What type of coaching would I do? What type of games would I play in, based on wanting to try to protect myself from that kind of criticism, wanting to try to like validate myself to the point where nobody would ever say that stuff about me.
Right.
But eventually what happened after a while was I started recognizing that you can't protect yourself fully, because even if you don't deserve it in the slightest, someone will still come out and just randomly decide that they don't like you, or that you're a hack and you don't deserve your position or whatever. And so that side of things it's kind of Final Table Boy in the chat says it's a bit harsh and unwarranted. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't think anybody deserves to be called out in that kind of fashion. Like, even if this guy did disagree with some stuff I was doing, there are ways to do it that's not like, you're the worst, I hate you, like calling me out publicly, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that anything this guy said, looking back at it, I don't think any of it had any merit whatsoever. But within poker, we have this environment where people like to critique each other, and they like to try to push other people down to make themselves feel better about them, about things. And that tends to be the case in a lot of places. Smithy says, so Smithy, I did see your comment about scanning the audience's faces. That's a funny one. I think we've all done that. We've all tried to look to the audience for cues. That's a pretty common one. But also, he says, I think these criticisms from strangers really hurt when they touch on things you feel already subconsciously or not, or things you fear may be true. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that largely when something just really strikes a nerve because you're really deep down, you're like afraid that this is what's happening or afraid that this is actually true. That's where it really stings a little bit, I think. So I'm sure that people in different areas can kind of feel that when you take criticism in a way where it's like, oh, I really wish you hadn't criticized me about that. That's the stuff that hurts. You said something interesting a minute ago about, I think, the nature of professional sports and how people tend to put their opinions out there. You mentioned getting people on Instagram telling you shouldn't be doing this or whatever. Do you feel like in sports we have this kind of environment where everybody, like, there's so much of a narrative around sports with everybody putting their opinions up there about who's good and who's not, or who's going to win, who's going to lose in a certain tournament, or basically just this huge narrative of public participation in dialogue about sports. Do you ever feel like at some point sports kind of become like a vehicle for us to just vent a lot of stuff that might be better, directed elsewhere?
Yes, 100%. It is. I come from a background where it's an individual sport. It's not a team sport, so you're not doing things collectively. But yes, we have gotten to this point. I don't know if you saw the other day, Matt, with the guy from the Lakers, was it Danny Green? Missed a three-pointer.
I wouldn't know.
Okay. So it was a game. I guess it was game 5 of the NBA Finals, and he missed a wide open 3 at the end of the game that would have given the Lakers potentially the championship. He got death threats. Right? And it's just like, this is something I can say that happens to tennis players on literally a daily basis from gamblers who are, putting all of their emotions and whatever it might have, and they're saying, "I wish colon cancer upon your mother." I mean, this is what they're getting on a daily basis. It is anybody who's in the public eye nowadays with social media. This is part of the deal, and it's truly unfair, but it is part of the deal. You have to somehow get to this understanding that there are going to be people who are taking out their own frustrations, their own anger, their own mental health, whatever it might be. They're taking it out on others because it's easier. I'm dealing with that. I know all these athletes that are dealing with that. I want to make sure I give a plug in this venue here to my podcast partner is named Noah Rubin. He is 24 years old. We have about let's say a 20-year age difference. I try to give myself 15 there, but we have become very close friends because we both kind of come from the same background. And he started a program called Behind the Racket.
Okay.
It's based on the Instagram account People of New York, which I know a lot of people are familiar with. Where it's people.
Oh, is it Humans of New York? Is that the one?
Yeah, Humans of New York. Where basically they just went up to random people in New York and asked for their story.
Yeah.
And so Noah, what he has done with his Behind the Racket, and it's now come into a podcast that we work together on as well. But he basically started going to some of the tennis players and asking them their story, or something that had happened to them. Recently, he talked to a player named Facundo Mena, who his father had passed away, and nobody knew it, and he was still getting death threats for the way he had been playing, and nobody knew that he was struggling so much mentally. Yeah, because his father had passed away, and that's the thing. We, for some reason, we've gotten to this point, Matt, where we feel it's okay just to hurl insults and hurl hatred and spew all these kind of things at people because they're almost like they're not real because they're on our TV. And I don't know how we fix that as a society, It's very challenging, especially in the sports world, because I mean, for the love of God, Danny Green missed a 3-pointer. It's a human thing. He missed a 3-pointer that was wide open, and yeah, should he have made it? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
He's human. He makes mistakes. All these tennis players make mistakes. You're a poker player. You make a mistake. I'm a broadcaster. I make mistakes. It's okay. But yeah, for some reason, it's just become completely all right just to spew whatever you can at people on social media, various forms, and it's really disappointing. And I all I can say is I just try to change it how I can, and try to teach my child how to teach people I interact with that, let's try and work on a different way to kind of get through that and make sure that this is not the way we move forward.
Yeah, and certainly I think that there are a lot of communities out there that surround sports that are pretty close knit, but there's also a lot where they're very fractious, and I think that for me, coming from the UK, like obviously football, soccer is the biggest sport over there, but the community is so broken up into literally rival factions, where if somebody is, and I've it's funny, my wife is in the chat, and I've gone through this with her multiple times of explaining the complex logistics of football rivalries in the UK,
right.
Because you have the one team whose fans absolutely despise the fans of other teams, or another specific team, and those two teams hate each other like on a very, very deep level, to the point where the whole the infrastructure of English football goes to great lengths to introduce rules and even laws to make sure that the fans of those two teams can't fight the crap out of each other every time they play each other.
Right.
And then you also have all these secondary rivalries. So, for example, if you take a team in England, one of the bigger teams in England, like let's just take Manchester United or something, right? They've been the biggest team in England for a very long time.
Right.
Their fans and Manchester City's fans absolutely hate each other because they're in the same city. It's sort of like the Cubs and the White Sox, maybe, stuff like that,
right.
or like they're just in the same city and they just hate each other. But Manchester United also hate Liverpool because who are very, very close by. And then at the same time, you've got Leeds United, who are a team that's based close to Manchester United, who Manchester United, they kind of hate them, but those two teams haven't had that much of a rivalry in recent years. So what happens is Leeds United just hate Manchester United with a passion, and that's not necessarily replicated because Manchester United have these other rivalries that they're too preoccupied by, right? So you can chart the anger and the rivalry and the hatred that goes on between football fans in England, just based on geography, based on all kinds of class issues, based on all kinds of different sort of factors. But what ends up happening is something that you're passionate about as a fan of the sport can become something very, very toxic because the environment is just full of people throwing insults back and forward at each other. And I think it's hard nowadays in our environment that we're in. Kat mentions dehumanization is a big problem, especially now that everyone's connected through the web. Absolutely. Right now, we don't necessarily see each other as humans. And if we're into sports and we're talking about it with people on the web, like someone who has a different opinion or who supports a different team, it can suddenly be like, oh, screw you, buddy, and I think that I don't know what steps we can take as a society to like scale back the dialogue, but it's sort of concerning, I guess, that even in sports like tennis, where you would think that people didn't feel strongly enough about any one individual player that they were willing to go out there and insult people, but I guess that's not true from what I'm hearing, right?
So Prodigy ENG Joe, he is a huge Novak Djokovic fan, Novak fan. He made a comment of Rafael Nadal. If you don't follow tennis, he's also one of the best three of all time, if you will. And Joe just got a huge amount of vitriol on Twitter for having just saying something that I didn't even think was very controversial about Rafael Nadal because he's a known Novak fan. It's the same thing with Man City, Man United. I mean, there's amongst the big three on the men's side specifically, it is passionate and pretty effing ugly. It's not good.
Yeah, that's crazy. Because I mean, for me, it's like with football, I looked at with football in particular. There's so many cultural factors that I assumed were going into it. Like for certain teams, it's a class issue. It's working class versus the perception of you're not working class. You're the ones who are culturally oppressing me as a working class person. Like, there's a lot of history in English football that goes back a long time that taps into that. And my assumption was that tennis, like, yeah, there's a lot of history to it, but each individual person doesn't go back 100 years. So, how could it be that way? But I really think it seems like it's people just channeling. They have that some kind of something that they haven't expressed, and they're channeling it in some way. My wife in chat, Cricket Pinkball, says, I think we do see each other as human, because what people yell at each other is designed to humiliate, insult, and terrify each other. The hatred is focused entirely on hurting us in human ways. Yeah, I think it's
great point.
I think it's scary when you think about it in those terms, right? Because it taps into our capacity to like, in the moment of being caught up in or swept up in an emotion, we can say things that are really hurtful to somebody. And football in the UK has a big problem with racism right now. We have all kinds of problems that we're trying to address where people, whether it's the dehumanizing impact of people saying things online and being racist towards major players and not recognizing the consequences of that, or individual actions towards each other. It could be rival fans who fully understand exactly the humanity of somebody else, but they're willing to be verbally abusive or be violent towards people. And I think that part of creating a society that is more conducive to better mental health on the part of everybody is addressing the root causes of these things, and I would hope that we can see a society sometime in the future where at least individual sportsmen and athletes can exist without dealing with this kind of abuse.
It's interesting because I think it's going to be a generational thing, right, Matt? It's not going to happen in a year. Right. It's going to happen over a generation or 2 generations. I know you've been rather vocal on social media about political situation here in the U.S. Specifically, and I think it's I would say it's a rather global issue where we're having a lot of nationalization. I think we're having rather extreme right-wing factions right now. But I also see at the same time, at least here in the States, there is a greater focus on the idea of teaching children an emotional component, if you will. Yeah, I think there's definitely people are realizing that needs to be a priority. So that that's kind of, I think, the long-term solution to the idea of doing away with the idea of hatred, the idea of toxically, spewing this onto other people, is by fixing it within yourself and starting that from an early age. So I think we're at, I have been saying to some of my friends, I think we're at this really weird, like, I don't know, like, I feel like it's a turning point in our society about whether we kind of decide to allow this idea of hatred, idea of racism, this idea of misogyny, all of that continue, or if we start teaching children at a younger age what it means to have emotions, what it means to have compassion, what it means to have empathy, and teach that. I think that has to happen, because I think that's the long-term solution in terms of our society, not just here in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to that in just a second and talk about how it relates to your own parenting and the way you do that with your daughter. But I want to just tackle Smithy's question here. He says, is it different hating on a team rather than hating on an individual sportsman? That's an interesting question, because for me, I think that part of my college education involved doing a lot of thinking about or doing a lot of studying about concepts like nationalism and things like that, and how they develop and how this kind of tribalism develops. And I think that on a certain level, when you're hating on a team, you are you're looking at it as an entity, right, as opposed to an individual. But I think that there's an argument to be made that it's almost just as damaging, because what it is it's that same hatred multiplied, right? Because suddenly everybody who starts to identify with that overarching concept that is this team, in the same way that we identify with concepts like religion or political affiliation as a grand thing that unifies a group of people.
Yeah.
Everybody who identifies with that starts to feel like the insult is directed towards them, because that's how humans are. We assume that anything that is vaguely directed towards us is completely directed towards us. And so we get to this point where theoretically you can say like, oh, screw this particular team, I hate them. But then some guy that you don't know, that you've never spoken to, who really likes that team, is now going to feel like, hey, why is this guy attacking me? You know,
right.
And suddenly it's like a multiplied factor. So I think on a certain level, when we attack individual sportsmen, there's, you know, it's a different dynamic, obviously, and no individual deserves to be subjected to that. And there's an argument that says when you attack a team, you're not attacking an individual person, so like nobody's really getting hurt, you know. But I think ultimately people do get hurt, because in the bigger picture, that antagonism leads to an environment of constant back and forth. And then in particular, when you look at certain environments, like if you look at football games in the UK, it literally does lead to violence at times. And so if we want an environment with less of that, if we want an environment that's more understanding and more reasonable, we need to recognize that hating on anybody is not a productive approach. You know, it's not an approach that leads to good outcomes.
And I can speak to it on the individual side, because I have seen firsthand not only the vitriol that an individual athlete receives, Matt, but I also see its impact. I know and have talked with players who immediately will. There are some of listen, we all have our own ways of coping with mental health, right? And I see some players who will on purpose go into their Instagram DMs right after a match that they've lost to see the hatred, to essentially confirm, you know, how they're feeling in that moment. And it destroys me to just to see this happening, but I see it on a daily basis when I'm at a tournament. And so I know the impact it can have on that individual within the day. Some people are just able to handle it better. Some people don't check it at all. That's kind of limiting as it is, but yeah, it's hard, because I think you're exactly right. No matter whether it's the team aspect or whether it's an individual aspect, it's still hate that's going out. You know, it's not about which one is worse. It's about the fact that the problem is that there's somebody out there who is spewing that hate, who's you know, putting this out into social media. That's where the issue needs to be, about, you know, the focus of how we make that better. So that it doesn't affect an individual, or it doesn't affect a fan of a team, something like that. We have to work on how we make that a little bit better, so it's not something that's so prevalent in our society. Yeah,
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So let's go back to that issue there. You kind of touched on it a little bit, of how parents can maybe encourage that attitude within their kids, of being open to emotions and being open to those experiences, and just kind of developing that emotional intelligence. So how do you encourage your daughter to kind of become that type of person as a parent?
Yeah, it's been really challenging, especially, you know, knowing, as I said, my parents got divorced at an early age, much like yours did, Matt, and unfortunately for my daughter, her parents have gotten divorced at an early age. My ex-wife and I have gone through our own kind of healing process to kind of get to a point where we are co-parenting responsibly. We're co-parenting together very well now. But I think it's pretty crucial for parents to have those talks amongst themselves about, you know, how we manage those emotions, and have good analysis of what our child is going through, right, with our daughter. So one thing that we have done, both of us have introduced books on the subjects of feelings.
Cool. Okay.
At the age of 2 or 3, just kind of, so she has the understanding of, this is what happiness looks like. This is what it looks like when you're mad. This is what it looks like when you're sad, and introducing those types of, just introducing emotions at a very young age. It's been very important for me to express my emotions to her in an honest way, and say why I'm mad about something, and what that means. For example, if I say, I'm very mad at you right now because you broke something,
Mm-hmm.
I still love you very much, but I'm very mad right now and I need a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I try to set that example. You can't teach a child and say, this is what empathy is. You should feel it. That doesn't
Right.
work, right? But I'm, expressing those emotions and reinforcing those emotions over and over again. We have in our condo here, we have, I would call it, to an adult, I'd call it a reflection area,
Mm-hmm.
but it's essentially quiet space that no matter what, if one of us, my daughter or I, say we need a minute alone, that's the area where you can go, and the other person's not allowed to interrupt you in that moment.
That's great.
So I think it's just this idea of the parents kind of getting this idea of discussing amongst themselves what emotions mean, that they matter, and then expressing them to the child over and over again, reinforcing constantly love, but their disapproval that goes hand in hand with it at times, but just having that very honest and open, relationship with your child is the way I think we can teach that, at least with our daughter. And so I think we've all had these discussions amongst ourselves. I think we're doing a good job. My mom actually said to me the other day, because as you know, any child that goes through divorce, they go through some struggles about attachment and those kind of things. And my mom actually said to me the other day, that Marnie, my daughter, has grown so much in that regard. Unfortunately, my grandmother passed away a couple days ago, and
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
thank you. But Marnie, my daughter, wanted to call my mom, and ask how she was doing after she knew that mom lost her mom.
Yeah.
So she wanted to call Grandma Z to see if she was okay. And that was one of those steps where I realized, we are having these discussions, and they are paying off, because Ella understands that it's important to call and ask how somebody's doing. So I don't know. I think for me, it's just, again, like I said, just the reinforcing over and over again of the fact that it's okay in the household to talk about emotions, set good examples, make sure love is always expressed, and just continue to talk about it.
Yeah, that's great advice, I think. So Smithy mentions as well, my kid's school teaches them colored zones relating to certain emotions. They seem to find it much easier to say they're in the red zone, and then we start a conversation about how they feel and how we can move them back to the green zone. Seems to work well with them. That sounds great. That sounds like a really interesting methodology.
We have, in Tulsa, we have schools of choice. And I saw that actually in one of the schools, and unfortunately we didn't pick that school just because of COVID and how everything has kind of happened over the last few months. But yeah, I saw that and I thought that was incredible. Just a lot more schools seem to be having, much like we have our reflection area. A lot of schools and classrooms, especially for younger kids, have that nowadays as well. Just so that if you are having a moment, you can go over there and we'll see what we can do to kind of get you back into the general population, if you will.
Yeah, that sounds like a really, I think, a productive way to get kids to kind of make friends with their emotions, as opposed to seeing them as the enemy. And I think that that idea of understanding one's own emotions and looking at them as a sort of inescapable part of the human experience, I think is something that, for myself, like within poker, it took me a while to sort of recognize that I didn't have to get to this point of just feeling no emotions whatsoever and being able to deal with everything in poker, the ups and downs, in this kind of just natural, easy way. It took me a long time to kind of say it's okay for me to kind of feel like crap sometimes when things aren't going well. It's okay to, when things are going well, to say, oh, this is great, things are going well, and congratulate myself. And that, and I think that we're all kind of conditioned now. Not just in poker but elsewhere, but we're all kind of conditioned to have this approach where we feel like it's bad to celebrate ourselves in some way. We feel like it's bad to say I did a good thing, or to just like take time to congratulate ourselves. And I think that's it's a tricky thing to get around. But I from the way you're reacting, I'm guessing you see that in broadcasting too. Do you feel like there's that same kind of sense?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we were kind of talking about those ideas of mistakes, but yeah, do you know what it looks like if I were to go on to social media right after I do my job and be like, man, I killed it today? I just be like, people are like, what's wrong with you? But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay.
Right.
Like, yeah, it's okay to say that. It's
Hmm.
okay. Because we're all going to have those good days and those bad days. Celebrate the good days when you can. Absolutely. And going back to the parenting thing, that's something I try to teach to my daughter as well. She has a little bit of a hard time with, um, I don't know, self-congratulating herself,
Hmm.
right? And so I've tried to say, Marnie, that was amazing. You did such a great job. One of the things I had a therapist who retired, and in one of the last sessions we had, she told me about this parent she had seen at a store, and it's something that had stayed with her for a long time. This idea of, um, if your child does something positive, and it happened in the store that she saw, and the parent, instead of saying, I'm so proud of you, the parent said, you did such a great job.
Hmm.
And I know that's just a little tweak, right? But it's, instead of inserting yourself into the
Hmm.
situation and making it a conditional relationship, you're reinforcing to the child, you did this, you
Yeah.
did a good job. And that's something that I've not only taken in with my daughter to, again, reinforce I don't know, reinforce the positive feeling she might have, but I want to make sure it's hers, right? I also try to take that into my broadcasting relationships that I have with players. I don't say things like, I'm happy for you to have won. I'll say, great job today.
Hmm.
I try not to make it about me. I try to make sure that they get to express, or excuse me, they get to feel that feeling themselves, however they're feeling it, and
Hmm.
not insert myself onto it. I try to do that as best I can. But that's something that's really stuck with me, specifically on the parenting side, because I don't want her and I to have a conditional relationship where it's fraught with looking for my approval. That's something that I still continue to deal with myself, right? I want her to feel however she's going to feel about something that she's just done. Know
Hmm.
that I'm happy about it. Know that I think she did well, and as she's welcome to feel however she wants to feel about it.
Yeah, that's great. I'm laughing over here. I'm trying to stifle a laugh here because my wife is in chat saying, "I'll never say I'm proud of you again." So, I guess as long as you replace it with something alternative, that's fine. But I mean, if you keep doing that with all the nice things that you say to me, I'm gonna get a bit worried. All right, I don't know what you've done to me, Mike. You've
I'm so
you've
sorry. I'm
you've
so
you've
sorry.
ruined it. I don't know what you've done. Anyway, something you touched on there, I think is quite interesting, actually. And I know we don't have too long left. She now says that you're doing an awesome job. Thank you. I appreciate it. So yeah, she rescued it. Yeah, we don't have too long left, but something you touched on there is the idea of your interactions with the players in tennis. And I'm curious, do you kind of, as an observer or as someone who's kind of connected to the game but isn't in that position of playing, do you notice players going through these kind of mental ups and downs
Yeah, sure.
from the outside? Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
100%. Especially when I'm again, what's called the challenger. It's kind of like that, just below the Grand Slams level.
Mm-hmm.
I am broadcasting literally 10 feet away from the players.
Wow.
Like,
Okay.
literally, my spot is that close. So I have to whisper when I commentate,
Wow.
often, because of the fact that yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's right there on top of them. So not only can I see it, I can hear it. I can
Yeah.
genuinely hear when they are berating themselves over and over again. One of the ways I've actually tried to give back, and I haven't done this for a couple of years, it's pretty famous that players crack their rackets on the
Oh,
ground
right.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
smash
Yeah.
their racket, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've actually taken it upon myself to kind of reframe that, if
Mm-hmm.
you will, literally and figuratively here. But I will salvage that broken racket from the garbage,
Oh,
and
cool.
and when they get to a point where they're okay, I actually have them autograph it. And I've done a couple of auctions to help a children's charity back in Illinois. And I'm trying to find a new charity to work with right now.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it's so hard because I've said this before. I know times where players are dealing with a breakup with a girlfriend. I know times when players are just, they ate something bad, and I will be able to see them going through these emotions immediately within a match, and I can say it's 2-1 in the first set, and I'll be like, yep, this match is done. We are done. Wow. We're going to be out here for another hour and a half, but I know this match is over. I can, and I'll actually turn off a little bit in my head. I'll just kind of go through the motions as opposed to giving it full effort. But yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's also a privilege that I get to know these players up close and personal better than anybody. I can tell you more about some of these guys than anybody else in the world. I know them inside and out, and I know them as people. I don't have a relationship, and not too many broadcasters have a relationship with Novak or Roger Federer or some of those guys, but I have personal, like, texting, good friend, have a coffee with relationships with guys who've kind of come up. You might not know the names of players like Tommy Paul and Riley Opelka and Francis Tiafoe. They're young American players who are, I think, right now 22, 23. And they're in some range of 30 to 75 in the world, right? So they're doing it. They're getting things done. I have really close relationships with them because of the fact that we had these bonding moments where I saw them at their emotional worst. They saw me at times when I was having these incredible struggles myself. So we've kind of bonded in that way, and I'm so lucky to have those moments. There's a player named Tennis Sandgren. He one day, right when I was going through the worst of it with my divorce, it's the one time it's ever happened. I had to leave my broadcast position. I couldn't. I had to go home.
Wow.
He was practicing. He was not playing in a match, but he immediately, he knew that was so abnormal, right? That I would never do that. And he immediately just walked over quickly to where I was leaving the area, and just hugged me.
Wow.
And it's just like, this is a guy now who's reached the quarterfinals of the Australian Open twice, but like he saw in that moment that I've seen him at his very worst. I mean, he's had some really difficult lows, but in that moment he was human, and he just said, this is a guy who's going through the worst of it right now. I don't know what it is. And he just came over and hugged me and allowed me to cry on his shoulder for 5 minutes so that I was okay in that moment. And it's why I love my job as much as I do, because I have these moments with these people who I think are incredible athletes, and they're incredible human beings. And I get an up close and personal view of them that nobody else in the world does. And that's an honor. It's a privilege. I'm so lucky. I have missed it so much. I'm really excited that I get to keep doing it again in a couple of weeks in Cary, North Carolina, and Orlando, Florida. And it has been so much, it really has at times kind of provided me with stability on moments when I've needed it. And I'm really honored to have that job.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, normally I like to ask people a question that has a positive answer, but I don't feel like I need to at this point to end the show, because I think that's a fantastic note to end on. You know, we all, I think, we all have things about our careers that maybe don't feel great at times. We have things that we like, we have things that we don't like. Some of us have aspirations to get into other careers, but it's fantastic to hear from someone who loves what they do, is unapologetic about it. And also is doing a great job of using it as a platform to help people with their mental health and to help people in ways that they need. So great job, Mike. I think we're all very happy to see that there's people like you around out there.
Well, thank you. And like I said earlier, Matt, what you're doing is amazing. It really is. It takes a lot of guts. And I mean, you could go down so many paths with how you've been successful in poker, and I've been able to watch it. I was a TPE member years ago, so I've watched those videos. I've gotten to. I'm actually going to go see KB when I'm in North Carolina. I'm going to see KB.
Awesome.
But I know you could take it in so many different directions with what you've been able to achieve in the poker world, and for you to kind of set that aside and say, let's talk about mental health. Let's go a different direction. Let's do some gaming as well, and let's have fun with a mental health discussion. Is that takes guts. I can say when I heard about it, I was just so impressed, and I think you're doing a fantastic job, and it's very helpful for the long term, the big picture, especially in the world of poker where we really need it to talk about empathy and emotions, and just well done.
Well, I really appreciate that. It's stuff like that makes me very confident that I'm on the right kind of path. That's the kind of feedback that I don't get. That feedback about poker. Like, no one comes up to me and says, "I just love your 3 betting ranges so much." No one's out there saying that.
Well, so it's helped me a lot. Your videos definitely helped me a lot for what
all right. Well, I'm glad to hear it. But yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for being with us in the chat. What I'm going to do now is, Mike, whenever you're ready, you can hop off. I'm going to talk to the chat for a couple minutes. Thank you very much, Mike, for being with us. Hopefully we'll have you back again at some point. But until then, take care, and we'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, guys. That was great. I really enjoyed that conversation. Thank you to Mike for being here. Mike is a really interesting guy, as you can tell. He's got a lot of stories to tell. He's got a lot of interesting stuff to share about the tennis world. I don't know about you guys. I haven't watched any tennis in a long time, but that kind of made me want to watch some tennis. I kind of made me want to take an interest in tennis a bit more. So maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll watch some tennis sometime soon. Yeah, great guy, really great guy. Very glad you guys enjoyed the conversation. Very glad to have Mike here with us on the show. So what we're going to do now is we're going to follow the usual routine. We're going to get back to playing some games. I'm going to play some more of The Last of Us. So that will be starting in just a few minutes. What I have to do in the meantime is fix my audio, because I had a bit of a panic moment before I got started here, where my audio on my PlayStation headphones, so these headphones right here, was not working. So ever since I set up my new webcam, for some reason, these PlayStation headphones not recognized on my PC. So I've got to make sure that I can still get some kind of audio from my PlayStation through the computer into my headphones. So I will be back online in just a moment. I'm going to restart the stream. I'm going to take a quick break after that. And hopefully we'll be able to get underway very, very shortly with some more of The Last of Us. So join me in a bit, guys. I'm going to wrap up this portion of the stream, but I'll be back online with the Be Right Back screen in just a second.